Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Swan Signal Live, everyone. Really glad that you came back to join us today. Swan Signal Live is a production of Swan Bitcoin, the best place to accumulate Bitcoin, the greatest money that the history has ever known, the history of this humanity has ever known. I am Brady Swenson, head of education at Swan. This will be our closing show for the year. It's been an awesome year for Swan Signal Live. We started this thing on March 13th, the day after the big crash on March 12th, all the way down to 3,800 or whatever it was. Got inspired, like, hey, we got to get on Twitter and talk Bitcoin with some of our friends. And 43 shows later, we have Bitcoin Tina and Max Keiser here to close out the show, close out the year with us. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks to Brecky for your help behind the scenes and getting things organized. Thanks to Corey for your support as well, and Jorn for making the show look great. So, gents, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to get into this one. We got to talk about one thing, Max. You've been smashing by the last couple hours on Swan. We've got smash buys live and ready to go. How are you feeling it, man?
Yeah, the smash buys on Swan Bitcoin are awesome. And, I buy Bitcoin all the time from different services and exchanges and stuff. And I think this is just becoming the best one. It's easy and it's a lot of fun. The layout's great. It tells you how many sats you got. And it's just easy to do. And I cannot endorse this hard enough.
Awesome. Yeah, well, it's been asked for a long time. Glad that we are finally able to be rolling it out. We've got about a few hundred people who are enabled at this point. Hopefully tomorrow we'll have everybody enabled. And it'll be a lot of fun. Bitcoin Tina, thank you for joining the show, man. Appreciate you having you here. Tina is a former trader. He's a finance guy, knows his stuff on that front, and has been in Bitcoin for quite a while. Well known as being a perma bull on Bitcoin Twitter and really carrying the banner. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you very much, Brady. Hi, Max. Nice seeing you.
Yeah. Bitcoin Tina, it's great. I follow you on Twitter. I'm always there and getting the pump me up, man. I pump me up with Bitcoin Tina. I'm pumped up. You got me pumped up. When I read your stuff, I go out buy more. Yeah, what can I say?
I love you, Max. You pump everybody else up yourself. You're great.
Gonna pump it up, pump it up, pump it up, pump it up.
You've been in a lot longer than me.
Well, it's a movement. It's a lifestyle. It's a beyond the red pill is the orange pill. It's beyond the red pill. And it's changing everyone's frame of mind, frame of reference, the way they think. They're having a global raise of consciousness. We're seeing people that were doubters come on board. We're seeing people that were on board get more emphatic about it. We're seeing the whole thing is just utterly becoming climactic right here and heading into 2021. 21 million coins, 2021. We're going to see some fireworks, I think.
I agree. I very much agree.
Raul is in the chat, Tina, and he says that he's heard about your reputation. Your reputation precedes you on Twitter, and that you can melt some faces. So we've got to get Raul fired up today so he can smash by.
Oh, totally.
Max, you've been in this for a long time, since Bitcoin was a buck. You've been talking about it publicly for a very long time. Put this year in perspective of your, longer than most history of Bitcoin.
Right. Well, you had three major crashes, right? The one we just had was what, 70% or more. We had one in back in the 2012 area or so. That was a 90% one. It was a 30, dropped back to a buck. Then we hit like 1,000, dropped back to 250. Then we hit 20,000, dropped back to 4,000. So we've had three of these major contractions, if you will. I don't think we're going to have something like that going forward because there's just too much big money really moving into the space. I think, as the price goes higher, volatility is going to get less. And actually, Bitcoin is less volatile this year than a lot of other currencies out there. There's probably half a dozen other currencies that were much more volatile than Bitcoin. I think the volatility decreases. I think, this is really two things are going on. One thing is I think it's the end of an era. The era from 2009 to to 2017 was really the era of the swashbuckling lone Bitcoiner, and we have
Yeah.
legends in the industry, people that found it, and we know who they are, and they're bigger than life. But starting in 2018, 2019, and now 2020, now the industry has totally changed. Now Tina's been on Wall Street as I've been on Wall Street, and I would say it's kind of similar. I'm curious what he thinks about this. Back in the 80s, when I was on Wall Street, from 82 to 87, we were all in our 20s, and we were all doing the Wall Street thing hard. Then the 87 crash hit, and what came out of that was a lot more corporatization of the merger and acquisition game. The Carl Icahns and the Ivan Boesky and those guys as the huge personalities, Ron Perlman, they became less of a factor and became more of huge banks, more consolidation. And so it's kind of an end of an era in a lot of ways, that the 80s era had ended. It seems to me that similarly with Bitcoin, where we've ended that period of Wild West days, and now we're entering more of an institutional-led global market, which is going to be great for the price, but it's not going to be as fun, if I may say that.
Yeah.
It's like
It was the 60s of Bitcoin.
It's insane how much I agree with you on everything you just said. So I keep telling people that I expect there to be no more than 30 to 40% bear markets. The reason being primarily is not only are people coming in with bigger money, but the whole perception of Bitcoin as an asset is undergoing a radical shift on the part of those people with big money and institutions, where it's going from an asset which is thought very poorly of and thought as weird and quirky and not understood at all, to an asset that ultimately is a must-own asset and becomes a core to the portfolio ultimately as well. And so that major shift, so when you have people who start to perceive it differently, you're going to bring in money. I think you'll have guys, bigger money guys, they might sell a little bit at whatever they think the peak is, but it goes down 30 or 40%, and they start to say, oh my God, I should have bought more of this. They add to their position, and that keeps the market from collapsing 80 to 90%. On top of that, there'll be other players. So the guys who will have bought 1, 2, 5% will be strutting around having made 10, 20x their money. And they'll have friends who'll be like, damn, I didn't put anything into that. And see it drop 30 or 40% and say, I got to get me some of that. And so I agree. I think it's going to change the trading of it entirely. And I think you're not going to see, I do think you'll see pretty substantial pumps because there's only so much of it out there. Yeah. But I don't think you'll see these more than a 30 to 40% bear market, not going to see 80 to 90%. And I agree with what Max said about Wall Street. I think that's really exactly right. People forget that in 1995 and 1996, the S&P was up 70%, which was an enormous amount. The bull market that started in November 94 with the election of the Republicans and the Newt Gingrich House of Representatives was the start of a bull market. And that market pretty much went nonstop into 2000 with a brief interruption with the tie bot and long-term capital management in 97 and 98. So you had a pretty long bull market. I think this will be a much bigger bull market because of the scarcity of Bitcoin. I think the more and more people begin to understand the nature of this technology, it's not just a reserve asset. I think it's being very much undersold by people, calling it just a reserve asset. The technology being developed in Bitcoin is really substantial, and I think that it needs more coverage from people. There's all sorts of really neat things. I think perception is a little mistaken. I think people want to create a legacy overlay on what Bitcoin is, which is a huge mistake. So you have things like Lightning Pool, which is really significant out there. People barely know anything about it. And it's a trust minimized form of lending. There's no lending that exists like this. And you're actually lending your Bitcoin so other people can use it locked in some kind of a multi-sig, I think. I don't know the details of Lightning Pool, but this is a very different kind of a product. And this is nothing. The DeFi space right now looks like some kind of a gambling version of a Tinker Toy set that's supposed to be like the legacy system, which is just sort of ridiculous. It's sort of like some kind of a weird amusement park that people go to play carnival games and win dumb prizes. Whereas in Bitcoin, the real DeFi that's going to happen is in things like Lightning Pool, which is amazingly cool. And I think you'll have more people who are smart, who figure out trust minimized ways of lending. And that's where the real excitement is. And so Bitcoin is so undersold. And as the world begins to understand what this thing really is and what's being developed, they'll be completely blown away by it. Their description of it is completely inadequate.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. You know, I mean, you're describing the 90s there, which was also similar to the 80s. You know, you had that big move up until the dot-com crash, and similarly, the dot-com up until the crash of 2001 was filled with a lot of people who were in it for a certain ideology. You had John Perry Barlow, who wrote the Declaration of Independence for the Internet, and I was involved in something in Los Angeles, and we know everyone was talking about how liberating this all was, and we could all create our own content, and this was a whole revolution. Then after the crash of 2001, it became totally consolidated, and the effort to turn the internet into HBO, which effectively has become everything is streaming, everything is pay to play. And that era, that age of innocence it was done. So with Bitcoin, I think also we had an age of innocence and personalities, and I think it's finished. I think now we're going to have this huge run up. It's going to be more institutional. You know, I was looking at something, of course, on Twitter where I see most of my perception of reality. And there's something going around, which I think is very, very smart. And people are comparing the Big Short, which was that huge bet in 2008 against the subprime market, and they made a movie about it, to Michael Saylor borrowing money at 0.75% and going long Bitcoin and calling this the big long. You know, I mean, there is some symmetry there. It's another kind of a Wall Street reference. Tina, your thoughts?
Well, I spent a lot of time short selling. And I used to go to things like grants conferences, and I was very much of a grants follower. I knew a lot of these guys. I followed a lot of them, guys like Bill Fleckenstein and Fred Hickey and others. And I did short a lot of stocks. I think what these guys don't understand is that Bitcoin is it's a short on the entire legacy system. And it's a brand new technology that's going to completely remake the economic paradigm. And I think people are missing this. I think they miss how big this is. It's a much better paradigm than the existing economic paradigm, which is very unfair in many ways. And I think that this is huge. I think that it is beyond huge. It's not just about making money. And I think people have the wrong take on a lot of this. They want to overlay the way they see the world with the way Bitcoin has to be. And I think that's completely wrong. Technology changes the way the world works. People have a hard time imagining a world that's different from the world that they know. And technology is constantly changing how things work, and you wind up with new institutions and new ways of doing things, which completely replace and displace things. Henry Ford said, if people had asked me, they would have asked for faster horses. And I think that this is constantly a human foible to assume that you're going to take new technologies and new ways of doing things. I argue that banking was a technological solution. We're still working with a technological solution which was invented in like the 1300s or the 1400s. Banking is going to completely be revamped and completely changed and maybe completely eliminated. People think fractional reserve banking has to exist, and I disagree with that entirely. Fractional reserve banking existed for a particular reason, because the money was such that you had to have fractional reserve banking. With money which is divisible, the way Bitcoin is, which is essentially infinitely divisible, where payments can be made virtually instantly, the entire way that the legacy system evolves is going to become an entirely different system. It's not going to be an overlay. And there's this very strong risk, and I think a risk that a lot of people who are coming to, quote unquote, the crypto space, who don't really get this, is that Bitcoin is going to displace all of those things that exist in the system that we have today. It's going to completely remake it. And if you try to build a model of a business based on legacy, guess what? You're going to be blown out of the water in the next decade, and your business won't exist. If you're building for yesteryear, you're not going to exist in that business by the end of the decade. You have to skate to where the puck is going, not to where the puck is, and certainly not to where the puck was. And so I think you have a lot of people who think they're smart, who think they understand things, and they're getting it all wrong.
Yeah, but the question,
I hear you, man. There's so much there. I'm taking notes. I'm gonna bring us back. I'm gonna bring us back and forth, but Max, please take it.
Yeah, is there, like there was with the Big Short, which was the taking down of the subprime market by some Wall Street sharpies who made billions doing so. Michael Saylor is engaging in the big long. He's engaging in a speculative attack where he can borrow at 0.75%, which is extraordinarily cheap historically. And he's buying Bitcoin effectively to attack the Fed and attack the US dollar in the same way that George Soros did in 1992. They attacked the British pound and they broke the Bank of England. They forced Britain out of the exchange rate mechanism. And Soros made $1 billion in a week. It seems to me that Michael Saylor is launching this speculative attack against the US dollar by borrowing at these artificially low rates and loading up on Bitcoin. And that's and the dollar is getting weak. I saw it's weak again today. It's looking terrible. You know, if the dollar keeps getting weaker, that means we got a real problem on our hands in America, because inflation is going to start really printing at numbers that nobody's seen in 20, 30 years. And the people making money on Bitcoin as it gallops through 100,000 and beyond are going to be like, well, we told you so. But guess what? The keys are unconfiscatable, so go fuck yourself, right? And right? Is that what we're Wall Street veterans. I mean, when Paul Tudor Jones said it's the fastest horse in the race and it's good for humanity, that's like throwing red meat to a cage full of lions.
I have to say, I see it differently, Max. And number one, I think that people conflate a weaker dollar in currency terms as opposed to a weaker dollar in buying power terms. And I think this happens all the time. And I think a lot of people do it. And I think it's a mistake to do that. The weakness in the dollar is reflected in both inflation as well as in currency terms. And it's not only the currency terms that matter. In fact, I would argue that the weakness in the dollar is more in inflation terms. And what we've seen in the last 40 years has been asset inflation. So what happens is the dollar weakness is reflected in an S&P that goes up compounded annually at some very high rate, and NASDAQ, which does similarly. That's the real weakness in the dollar. That's the big, broader weakness in the dollar and fiat currencies generally. So I don't quite agree with the speculative attack argument.
Right. No, I get it. We got asset inflation, and the Fed's claiming they're fighting deflation, even though if you included something that Michael Saylor points out, he said that 20 years ago, you could buy $1 million in bonds and get a 5% coupon and have $50,000 a year in income. And now you need 10 to 20 times that purchase in bonds. And that's genuine inflation in his terms, right? But we have asset price inflation for sure. But the average person in America, because everything's been outsourced to China and because our energy is basically coming in from countries that we have colonized in the Middle East, the average American doesn't really have a price to sticker shock when they go shop for food or they buy their gasoline. So now with the weakness in the dollar that we're seeing and the inability to control that weakness in the dollar because the Fed is completely tapped out, and Michael Saylor has provided a vector out of this mess, unlike gold. Gold is not the vector out because it's totally controlled. And people start saying, wait a minute, my CPI just doubled in the last 6 months. And, my dollar can't buy 25 cents worth of groceries that I got in 2018, right? I mean, that's real CPI inflation. Can't be, it's the genie's out of the bottle and there's no way to bring it back in. I mean, that's what I think is going to catch people's attention. And that's also going to start some panic buying into Bitcoin as the fastest horse in the race, gold. And, we'll get some of the ancillary benefit of that, but it won't be like Bitcoin, which is set to, print many multiples of the current price.
When it comes to currency collapses, from what I know of it, and I'm no expert in it, although I do remember, I forget where I was. I was traveling somewhere when that happened. Can't remember where it was. It was I think 1992. Usually it's because locals are fleeing their currency. But I don't think this is just about a currency collapse. I think that's really wrong. I think that you're actually going to watch Bitcoin go up a lot in value and people will simply adopt the new system. I think that people have buying urgency because the price goes up. And I don't
but it goes up against what?
It goes up against the dollar.
The dollar is already in a hyperinflationary collapse against Bitcoin right now. Absolutely. It's just not hit the mainstream media yet.
Absolutely.
Once you've got $100,000 Bitcoin and people also are losing, they can't afford food anymore. That's going to be highly problematic as the politics of that in America in 2021.
But I don't think you're going to have a situation where people can't afford food. I think what you're going to see is you're going to see Bitcoin going up in value. Yeah, I like to ask this question because, see, I actually don't like this take. I don't like this framing because I don't really agree with it. And I think it brings about more fear than it brings about a positive nature and discussion of Bitcoin. So I'm not a fan of this. I'm not a fan of the speculative tax argument.
Just a quick side note, people already can't afford food. You got 150 million people in America out below the poverty line, and the food stamp programs and the other programs, if you pull the plug on those, you'd have that homeless crisis go up by dramatically anyway, as it is. People living in their cars to work at Walmart for the wages that don't support a lifestyle. So the poverty is an incredible problem in America.
I agree.
Right now, and any kind of dynamic change to the purchasing power of the dollar will exacerbate that to extraordinary levels.
Yep.
I don't think
I'm seeing it that way too. Go ahead.
I don't think that's what we're going to see, though. I don't think it plays out quite like that.
Well, the only way to not play it out like that is to print more money, right? We know that 30% of all the money ever been printed in America has been done so in the last two years or 3 years. Don't quote me on the exact numbers there, but it's an extraordinary up ramp. You see the M1 money supply in the last 6 months, like that hockey stick, just skyrocketing to the moon. Who's the biggest buyer of all this debt? It's America itself. It's the Federal Reserve Bank. So you've got this fiat currency crisis heading all over the world. The dollar is backed, according to Paul Krugman at the New York Times, by men with guns, right? So, and of course, if that's backing the dollar, the military industrial complex, which spends $250 million a day on gas alone, just to keep the tanks fueled up. That's what America pays on their daily gas bill, right? So now gas is, just goes up 3 or 4x. Right. And now the military, like every empire, they're like, we can't afford the freaking gas, man. The military's toast. And America can't support the dollar anymore. China, Russia, Iran, all these countries are already doing side deals and bilateral deals and getting out of the dollar as fast as they can and buying Bitcoin. So the dollar collapses. There's no way you can sugarcoat a dollar collapse. There's no rosy ending to that story. Its loss of purchasing power is profound. And the poverty that's already extremely pervasive in America, it goes through the roof, and you already have social unrest. So why not pour some gasoline on all those street protests? Why don't we get 1 million people on the street, torching cars? This is 2021, coming soon not to a theater near you.
I think you're right. Ultimately, I'm not sure if it's a 2021 event. I do think that they probably continue to play the same games with spending and controlling the yield curve, which is effectively money printing. So I do agree with that. I don't like the framing of it, and I don't know exactly. I think you watch a Bitcoin system grow dramatically, and it becomes like a giant craft which enables people to enter a new system. It doesn't have to be a meltdown quite described like that. If people,
right, look, I'm presenting a Van Gogh. I don't, you can put it in any frame you want. It doesn't change the quality of the painting, right? All the essences, all the colors, all the composition, all the brush strokes I've been building now since Clinton, since Reagan, and then Clinton, who got rid of Glass-Steagall, who they brought in the Commodity Futures Modernization Act, which totally undermined the U.S. economy and gave Wall Street the keys to the castle. They printed trillions of dollars. They bailed out all the banks. They bailed out long-term capital management. They engaged in moral hazard to the point where moral hazard became the de facto business model of America. Jamie Dimon keeps 90 cents of every dollar he steals. And that's the business model, fraud. Now that's unsustainable. And the only way we got a good scenario on the other end of this is that you got to let the system collapse. That's unfortunately what's got to happen sometimes. You got to let the system collapse. The sooner America utterly collapses and GDP collapses by 80%, the sooner we can rebuild this shit and have a country worth living in. Right now, it's not worth living in this country. It's a complete disaster area. We need the whole thing to completely collapse. And then the Constitution as an idea, the Bill of Rights as an idea, that will survive because you can't kill an idea. We build from scratch and Bitcoin becomes the reserve currency. That's definitely going to happen, but it's going to be a hell of a lot higher than it is here. If you want to be one of the architects of new America, buy Bitcoin now, become individually sovereign, and be the Ben Franklin of the 21st century. Or you can sit around with your dick in your hands and be fucking poor and eating dirt. Those are the two alternatives in 2021.
Max.
Well, then
Look, hold on 1 second, Tina. Hold on 1 second, Tina. So this is, I'm leaning on toward the Max side of the equation on this one. Now, I don't know like about the riots in the streets and the politics of fear, but we also have to be real at the same time, because I don't think that we can necessarily put this thing back in the bottle at this point, right? So like Max was saying on the Swan Lounge that you guys were at like a couple weeks ago, Michael Saylor's pulled the pin out at this point and just like thrown the grenade into the boardroom of the Federal Reserve Bank, right? So how do you stop it at this point? Once the play shows that it's going well, I mean, we had a PTJ was on May, it was in May of this year. MicroStrategy first announced this thing in August of this year. Since then, we're just seeing cascade, and all of this stuff happening behind the scenes. We're just going to see over the weeks and months of the coming year. And then it's not just equity and cash that they're putting into Bitcoin. It's now, low interest debt that the other side apparently just doesn't get yet. So everyone who understands what's happening gets to leverage up on everyone who doesn't understand what's happening. That's just like this massive cascade, and that's why we call it hyper Bitcoinization. It's like goes gradually, then absolutely suddenly.
Well,
right?
okay.
So how does that not happen? How do we go to 2028?
Okay.
Pro Bitcoin bet using interest rates that are artificially low because they've been bailing out the banks for 20 years and destroying the economy as a result. Michael Saylor stood up and said, I could have bought my own stock with these cheap rates, and I could have had stock options, and I could have made billions of dollars that way. But I think actually inflation is a real problem. So instead, I'm going to attack the Fed by doing a speculative attack by borrowing at these incredibly cheap rates and going long Bitcoin. And I think that is the pin being pulled on the grenade. And I think a lot of very wealthy people are going to do the exact same thing and follow in Michael Saylor's footsteps. And that means there's $100 trillion sitting in investable accounts around the world. Bitcoin market cap is under 300 billion. If only 5% of that money goes into Bitcoin, do the math. It goes a lot higher from here, and it takes a whole new generation with it because the millennials and the Gen Z are into Bitcoin. The baby boomers, they're going to get completely rolled over, and they should rightfully get rolled over because they're the ones who gave the millennials all the student debt. They made housing unaffordable, and they totally stole everything from the economy, and now they're going to get their comeuppance, and they deserve it.
So if you're right, and it plays out like that in 2021, as you say, your numbers are actually way off, because the numbers for 2021 start to look like north of 500,000 to a million, and the numbers for 2022 start to look like 10 million, and the numbers for 2023 start to look like 20 to 50 million. You don't have $100,000 Bitcoin next year. You have somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million Bitcoin next year, and $10 million Bitcoin the year after, and $20 to $50 million Bitcoin the year after.
Hold on, I got to smash buy some more Bitcoin on Swan right now. Nina's got me totaled up. I'm pumped up. Here I am on my limit. Raise my limit, Corey. I hit my limit again. Raise my limit, damn it. I feel a need. I feel a need for the corn.
Because the scenario of Michael Saylor types leveraging their balance sheet with debt to buy Bitcoin, you start to wildly reprice this thing in ways that is not accounted for in Plan B's stock to flow. It's wildly under accounted for. So no, but if that starts to become something, just moving people's assets as they are now into Bitcoin gives you somewhere between few $100,000 in the next 1 to 3 years. I think $200,000 to $400,000. But if you're going to get people who start to engage in that type of activity, borrowing to buy Bitcoin on that kind of size, then the numbers shoot up exponentially. Those numbers are way too low, because Plan B's numbers are based on comparisons of a world where that's not taking place. You don't have people borrowing to that extent to go buy assets which are fixed in supply with a known supply. So it's going to be like, bigger than an elephant stepping on a tube of toothpaste with a pinhole in it. It's going to be numbers that are much, much bigger than numbers that we expect if that kind of buying takes place. I don't know that.
Well, look, I mean, the Tinder is dry.
I agree.
Michael Saylor has thrown, started the fire, and it's a very dry fire, because the world in America, for example, just look at this whole stock buyback farce. Apple Computer, earnings have been going down for 10 years, and yet the stock's worth over it's close to $2 trillion. Why is that? Because of fraud, accounting fraud. They buy back their own stock with this cheap money, and they report earnings that are not going down, but they supposedly are going up, which is it used to be illegal to buy back your own stock until Reagan changed the law, and for obvious reasons. It's outright fraud. And all these companies in the S&P 500 engage in this massive accounting fraud. When people realize, the emperor has no clothes, there's no earnings, Tesla at 1,000 times earnings, give me a break there. But if you adjusted for the buybacks, the S&P right now would be down 50% from where it is today. 50%. So imagine that. So the S&P collapses by 50% in a week, like Enron disappeared in a day, because everyone realized it's all accounting fraud. And so now you got the contraction of that multi-trillion-dollar asset. If part of that money is going to jump into Bitcoin, and I agree with you, 100,000 is too low of a bar, because when the cascade effect kicks in, you're going to see $100,000 snap like Bolsa would, and just go from there. There's no top. There's no top, because with this fraudulent paper money system, there's no bottom.
Well, I don't disagree with anything you say. I don't think things work that fast, but they could. They could absolutely work that fast, because I've been looking at this since the early 90s. I think the Fed has been fucking up since the early 90s. I don't think people realize how much the Fed has been fucking up since the early 90s. I don't think people understand how bad policy is. And I do think that money has been fleeing. Right now, we have had a wicked inflation for a few decades already. We don't see it as that because it feels good. It's a feel-good inflation because it's an asset inflation. But if things start to accelerate like that, then the price of Bitcoin will really start to grow beyond numbers that I'm previously talking about. And we'll see a massive escalation, and the whole thing will be completely different. It will
completely devastated. All the models will be completely destroyed. Like Saylor said,
devastated.
Break them to the upside. Just breaking them all to the upside. But the thing is, I think that we've all been thinking that was going to happen in 6 to 8 years.
Well, I've
But
always
we've
said the
had
plan B.
a black swan this year, and it's pulling everything forward. And now Michael Saylor's pulled the pin, and speculative attack is on the table, and like all bets are off. 2021 could be the escape velocity year, the last cycle. It really could be that way just because of how everything's played out. What will slow it down? Let's talk about that. What would slow it down from happening? Because people just being in utter disbelief that this could actually be happening, right? That would probably slow people down. But there's going to be a lot of smart people who are starting to believe, right? So
I think the common answer you hear from people on slowing it down is action by the government. I actually think that accelerates it to the upside, because I think governmental action will cause people to realize, holy fucking shit, I have to own this goddamn thing. Because once they start to begin to understand it, and riots are people being insane, and we're in a financial riot right now. And one at a time, they come to Bitcoin, they gain their sanity, and they come to Bitcoin, except the process can get rapidly accelerated. I think you have a lot of people who are longer time holders of Bitcoin who hold a lot, who do not understand these issues at play. They own a lot of it. They do stupid shit with their Bitcoin. They sell it, they short it, they trade it. And these people are going to wind up with none. And I really hope they wind up with none, because I think they do a lot of damage to Bitcoin with some of the dumb stuff that they do, some of the shorting they do, some of the selling that they do. I think that there is a possibility that Saylor has pulled a pin. I think I agree with what you say, man. I don't disagree with that. I hold those same views myself. I think the system is irreparably broken. I think it's been broken for a very, very long time. And all of these things can come to a head. The whole notion of gradually, then suddenly, we could be close to entering that suddenly part. And I think you will have urgent buying at some point north of 20K. It might be at 50K, it might be at 100K. People will wake up, they will start allocating funds to it. I think that there is definitely a possibility this accelerates at a much faster rate than I thought. And I said to Plan B numerous times, your model breaks on the upside. To which he told me his model numbers are pretty high. And I say, still, your model breaks to the upside. And I maintain your model breaks.
Yeah, I think that's what the game theory says.
Well, look, there's two things here. Number one is liquidity. We're already seeing liquidity dry up on the major exchanges. So it's going to get hard to source Bitcoin. The demand is going up exponentially and supply is drying up. Okay. So you could get those huge 50,000 point or dollar prints. Like it goes 100,000 and the next print is 150,000. Because there's nothing
Absolutely.
for sale.
Oh, I've said this. I expect there to be.
There's no liquidity, right?
I expect in this decade, I don't know when, but I do expect that there to be exactly that issue. I've said this. I've been saying this for a long time. That I expect the CME to be blown up by Bitcoin. I expect all these Bitcoin lenders to get blown up. I think people who operate on a legacy model will get blown up. I expect there to be some point in the future time frame. I don't know exactly when, and I'll throw out, there could be over 24, 48, 72-hour period over a week where Bitcoin will lift from some number, $500,000 to $1.5 million, from $1 million to $7 million, where it will just lift. It will start to lift, and there'll be barely any prints because people won't want to sell, because selling will be moronic. And there'll be no liquidity, and you will simply watch a market lift and reprice. And I think people don't understand how that can happen. Bitcoin will crash to the upside. Bitcoin is not like any other market, and it will not come back in. People think, oh, well, it'll sell back in. Well, who will be the idiot that will sell it? Maybe you'll buy something with it, but you're not going to have to part with that much. If you
the U.S. government could say to Bitcoiners, pay your taxes in Bitcoin, we'll give you a 99 or 90% discount. And we'll give you a free, shopping mall somewhere in New York City.
Only if you never have to pay taxes ever again.
Right. I mean, the government.
If you pay it once and never pay taxes again.
They say, what about governments? Governments, is this a worry? My answer is, what government? Which government? Which government are you talking about? Which one?
What
government? Tell me which government is going to do this. And I'll tell you another government that'll say, go ahead and kill yourself because we're hoarding Bitcoin. Iran's already got 4% of the hash rate. if nobody responds to Iran, Iran's going to be the richest country in the world in another 5 years. And so either U.S. gets into the hash race now, or they need to start learning Arabic.
Yeah, I mean, take us through the game theory, Max. I mean, let's walk us through this. I mean,
the game theory is
like I said, we've been living with this sort of mental model. One sec, we've been living through this mental model, right, of 26, 28 years, right? Or I mean, sorry, 2026, 2028 is going to happen. People having a hard time seeing this. Walk through how this could happen next year, and hyper Bicoinization just blows everybody away.
Right. Well, first of all, I think in Iran actually they speak Farsi. I believe I got to get the comments clarify something. Get that clarified. But nevertheless, the game theory is baked into the Genesis block, right? So it's all the incentives that what makes Bitcoin perfect are all the incentives of all the actors in the protocol are perfectly balanced in the state of perfection. The nodes, the miners, the buyers, and everyone is in this perfectly game theory balanced protocol. And we saw it build over years. And, we saw, like, for all the miners, concentration, it was in the Ukraine, then it was in China, now it's in America. It's moving to, and it's a global feast, and it's all game theory driven, and nobody monopolizes it. China doesn't have monopolizes anything. That's false. You see this mining is dispersed all over the world. It's distributed. The need to distribute, it's built into the Genesis block. It's like a centrifugal force. It's like that when you go on the ride at the amusement park and you spin around and everything is forced out centrifugally, and then the bottom falls out and you're just stuck to the end of the wall. I don't know if people ever seen this ride at the amusement park, but it's a centrifugal force ride. And that's the Bitcoin is like this. It generates centrifugal force where distribution is constantly pushing to the edge, constantly pushing to the periphery. And the center it's never about the center. It's not centralized. So then you have this game theory jumps up to corporations. So now Michael Saylor has said laid down the law, laid down the glove, laid down the gauntlet to his corporate brethren in the boardrooms out there and said, I've already doubled my money. My stock price is like tripled or something like that. We've got, we're going to head to the highest stock price ever. I'm going to be richer than Jeff Bezos. I'm going to be worth $250 billion. I'm the biggest weenie waiver of all the weenie waivers. As Michael Saylor's got the biggest weenie. So then, you've got Jeff Bezos, you've got Tesla, you got all the billionaires going to be like, wait a minute, I can't let this guy have the biggest weenie. I've got to get my Bitcoin. I want to have the biggest weenie. So you got that going on, and then you apply that to countries, right? So countries are sitting there, and you got the U.S. dollar, world reserve currency, and you've got all the client states that have been abused and beaten up with the U.S. dollar with sanctions or censoring the SWIFT system or any number. Or as New York Times said, if you don't take our U.S. dollar, we're going to kill you, like they did in Libya, and they did in Iran, and they did in countries all over the world, isn't it? That's America's foreign policy. Take the dollar or we kill you. So all these countries are saying, hey, guess what? We got a vector out of here. We're going to start buying Bitcoin, hoarding Bitcoin, mining Bitcoin. So the game theory plays out. Then the U.S., like a Sputnik moment, they're like, oh, my God, we can't lose the hash race. We got to get into this. We're going to start subsidizing Bitcoin mining. Now the U.S. is like actively mining and buying and hoarding Bitcoin. So the game theory plays out on the sovereign level. It plays out on the sovereign wealth fund level. It plays out on the central bank level. I'm sure in 2021, some G20 central bank is going to say we're stocking Bitcoin as a strategic reserve. So they put on notice to the central banks now. Either you join us or you're going to be obliterated out of existence. The corporations, either you buy Bitcoin or you're going to go the way of the dodo. High net worth individuals, either you buy Bitcoin or your fiat money wealth is going to disintegrate to zero. So the game theory kicks in on all these levels, all the way up to the highest level, to the sovereign level. And that's how it kicks in. That's how it works. That's the vector that it's on. The Bitcoin is a vector. That's the best way to understand it. It's not like anything. No asset class in history has ever come close to being anything like Bitcoin. And it's on its own vector. And that vector is going to continue on with us or without us. Even if we all killed each other by throwing atomic weapons at each other and the human race became extinct in 6 months, Bitcoin would still be going. The vector is still in place. It doesn't need us. It's still going to be hashing every 10 minutes. It's up to us. Do we want to live anymore or die? Right? Bitcoin is the destroyer. It is the killer of the central bank plague. And that's how it all works out. That's the game theory. It's all playing out beautifully. It was all there on the Genesis block. It was all right there. That's just all there. What can I say? It's that was we were touched in a divine way.
The creator and the destroyer. Tina, I'm sure you've got comments. Let it rip.
Yeah, I'm just in awe of Max. At 11, just Saylor's personal holdings, what he's talked about as having 17,000 Bitcoin. At $11.7 million Bitcoin, he will have $200 billion, which is equivalent to Bezos. Of course, Bezos will probably be quite deflated at that point. I'm still going over in my head what Max is talking about. In my thinking, people have always thought I was crazy, but Max really takes it to another level. And
Tina, you know the psychology of these narcissistic megalomaniacs.
No, you're totally right. You're right.
Is driven by this mentality. He's been in the technology business for 25 years. MicroStrategy has been a peanut in the world of technology giants, and he's sick of it. He doesn't want to be a peanut anymore.
Yep.
And Bitcoin is his ticket to the big time.
Absolutely.
And once that becomes obvious, all these other guys are going to fall into place and start buying Bitcoin.
You're totally right about that. I think that's exactly not to denigrate Marco.
That's what I'm saying.
I think he's brilliant, but you're exactly right. MicroStrategy was a high flyer. Its stock was like $3,000 in today's dollars. It's like a $280 stock, $300 stock today. And Max is right. Michael had like $7 billion, and he was a big swinging dick in Washington back in 2000. And then the stock fell out, and Bitcoin is his ride. And Michael is very, 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 very smart. I mean, I think he's got some phenomenal insights, and I'm a huge fan. So he figured out that what Bitcoin is earlier than most people in his position, which I think is amazing, and I give him tremendous credit. Certainly some people have owned a lot from early on, but Michael figured it out now and gets it, bought it personally, bought it for MicroStrategy, and then issued debt in order to get more. And he totally gets it. He gets it in a deeper way than many Bitcoiners get it. He really gets it in an incredibly deep way. I've listened to, I think, every pod or YouTube that he's done. His insights are phenomenal. He understands history of science because he majored in that at MIT. He understands the perspective on this, and I think he's got this nailed in a way that almost no one else does. I think Max and I get it. I think we understand this. I think there are other people out there. I think many Bitcoin OGs don't understand it. I don't think they understand what they own. Some of these people who have 2,000, 5,000, 20,000 Bitcoin wouldn't do the stupid crap that they do if they understood what they owned. They wouldn't, why lend your Bitcoin for 3% if your Bitcoin is going to go up 100x in a few years? You don't do that. That's just dumb. Why risk it for something that's going to have these phenomenal returns? You don't do that. And I think he really does understand. And I think you're right. It could be the spark, because what you have is, I have said for a long time that the Fed is like a person with a gas pump on full, pouring it on the floor inside of a closed garage. And I've said Fed policy is his policy like that. It's in search of a spark and some oxygen. And all you have to do is that door opens, you get a spark, and boom, and the whole place goes. And Michael Saylor might be the spark. I mean, what we have here is we have, something starting, and the world is not paying attention to it, but the world is really a quick study, and people will figure this out and figure it out fast. And I think that this accelerates really quickly. And I think what people miss is, I think people think they have time, but they don't actually have that much time. You have to start getting a position on. You have to own some. You have to buy it. You have to learn how to get it off an exchange. You have to custody it yourself. Because if somebody else holds your Bitcoin for you, that day might come where somebody says, you know, you're not giving that. So the U.S. government says, you're not giving that Bitcoin out to anybody. We're taking it. And then you're kind of screwed. Well, that's a problem for the people who have their Bitcoin on those exchanges. But it ain't a problem for you if you control your own Bitcoin, because they can't get that. And
yeah.
So all right, here's a question for you.
What's that?
Here's a question for you.
Sure.
A thought exercise. If this game theory plays out on the sovereign level, will Grayscale, Bitcoin Trust, the Grayscale Corporation, which now owns a huge position in Bitcoin, be nationalized?
Anything's possible. I own anything's possible. That you can't simply have a taking without fair value. So look, I own some so that I can spend for my expenses without selling the Bitcoin that I have. They can't just take it. According to taking, you have to actually provide a fair price. So it is what it is. And
but in the case of Grayscale, you know, it's not. It's all right there, and it can be poached. You know, the U.S. government. Well, claiming eminent domain or some other emergency measure, you know, they have some infinite power. They walk into Barry Silbert's office and they say, Barry, thank you for your service. We now own Grayscale because we need the Bitcoin to compete with Russia, China, and Iran. And as a good patriot, I know you'll be on for the ride. Thank you, Barry. Have a nice day.
Well, BitGo, I was listening to Mike Belshie talk about BitGo, and BitGo, from what I understand, actually has a very advanced form of multisig, and they have it in multiple jurisdictions. So that can't happen to BitGo. So Bitcoin can't be confiscated like that, because if you're Bitcoin, I don't know if this is true, but this is what I heard in the podcast. So if Coinbase, and because I believe Grayscale was originally held at Zappo, which was bought by Coinbase, if Coinbase is doing something of a similar structure where you have multi-jurisdictional keys held for a multisig, then they can't simply acquire Grayscale's Bitcoin because it's multi-jurisdictional.
Right. However, but they do, but they have the ability to coerce. There was just a case recently where somebody was moving some of the Silk Road Bitcoin, and they coerced that person to give up their private keys, because once they had them in custody, they basically tortured them or threatened to torture them. So I got to ask, in other words, the government is not going to politely ask. I mean, they have, and Barry or the Armstrong or these guys, if they're not anonymous like Satoshi's anonymous, I mean, they know where they live. They can walk in, take them down to CIA headquarters, throw them in a box, and say, okay, let's play.
Well, that may be, but if it's multi-jurisdictional, then other people who control the keys in other parts of the world, in other jurisdictions that the U.S. doesn't have access to, they'll say, "Well, fuck you."
That's a good point. That's a good point. So if it's multi-sig and the sigs are in like Russia, and Russia would not play along, right? So, and all this kind of Russia-phobia we've seen in the last 4 years during the Trump administration, even though the genuine existential threat was coming from China, had nothing to do with Russia. But maybe part of that Russophobia was the recognition that a multi-sig wallet with signatures in Russia could be a problem in the future. So maybe that's why the U.S. government wastes so much time on that end of their waste of time businesses. But I agree with you. Multi-sig and multi-jurisdictional is a good way to protect against a single country trying to nationalize a huge honeypot of Bitcoin at Coinbase or at Grayscale. I think that's a good point.
I think so too. And I think it's a good place to bring in Corey. Corey wants to hop in on this discussion, help us wrap up the year as well. Here in 2020, going into 2021. take a moment. If you're watching now, we've got 650 people, most of you watching on YouTube. Go ahead and like this video. It does help spread the video and this Swan page out to more people on YouTube. Spread that good Bitcoin education. So smash that like button, subscribe, turn on notifications. We do this every Tuesday. This is the last of the year, but we'll be back on January 5th with Robert Breedlove and Nick Bhatia to kick back off a whole nother year. Every Tuesday, every Friday, we do Swan Lounge. Also very fun show. We bring in Bitcoiners more laid back. So definitely subscribe to the channel. Corey, welcome to the show, man. How's it going?
It's good to be here. This has been an incredible discussion so far. I'm absolutely loving the rotating images of Tina Lewis Black there. It's great. That was brilliant, Brecky. What? You looking at me? Anyway, yeah, it's just been an absolutely spectacular year. When I think back to the first week of January, I think we're still calling this Swan product Save Bitcoin at the time, and renamed it Swan and built the whole thing in Q1 and got live March 30th. It just it feels like so long ago. We wanted to launch the thing at Bitcoin 2020 in San Francisco, and that got completely blitzed by pandemic. And now we haven't seen each other. Any of us have barely seen each other in person all year, which is crazy. I see Brecky every once in a while in passing in LA, but that's about it. Anyway, what's left on the agenda for chatting today?
Oh, well, we've been through a ton. I mean, there's so much that, has been left on the table to dive back into as well. We could dive back into the idea of that, Bitcoin is a lot bigger than what it's being perceived as now. Like the idea of the narrative development. So we have digital gold's been around for a long time. People are finally starting to see that. The idea that Bitcoin is meant to be hodled. This is a scarce asset that we're supposed to hold on to and store our wealth in. The store of value narrative is being established. But as Tina was saying earlier, there's so much more to Bitcoin than just the adoption of it as a store of value by big corporations this year as a reserve asset. There's been a ton that's happened this year, and maybe we could just riff on that a little bit. Tina was talking about Lightning Pool and Lightning coming online. All of that's very important. The idea that DeFi looks like a place for adults to go gambling online, since you can't fly to Vegas, is actually moving over to Bitcoin. That's possible on Bitcoin with Lightning and RGB and all of that stuff. So there's a lot more going on here than just the store of value, although that's obviously going to be the driving narrative and has been all year. Does anybody want to talk about something interesting that a use case that Bitcoin has improved on over the year, or something that you think is important for us to keep in mind as we move forward and build?
Well, I guess just from a higher level perspective, you're just talking about money. So anything that you could do with money, and now you've imbued the money with better properties that make you be able to do things with money that lives on the internet. You're only limited by your own creativity to some degree. So you don't have to build this stuff into the protocol. There just needs to be like a unit that you can use for payment in your app or your system. And that thing could be decentralized or centralized. Like, it doesn't really matter. So you can do discrete log contracts, which is clever. You can do things with Lightning, like all of these different things. They could be called layers in as much as there's a decentralization aspect that uses the native currency or whatever, but you can also just use the currency just like any other business or idea or service that you ever come up with that has ever used money. And you can use Bitcoin instead and take advantage of some of the characteristics that are new to Bitcoin, like, multi-sig and Lightning and all these different things. So I think it was really cool that, as an example, you've watched Augur in the Ethereum space spend, 6-7 years, whatever. They were one of the first ICOs trying to get live and have some volumes for betting and trying to figure out oracles and all these different things. And they've taken so much money, and so much money has been spent, and, and they just never have done anything, right? It's just a coin that some people trade on a theme and a story, basically. Then you have like a tiny little startup with like 2 or 3 people. I think we had the Atomic Loans guys come over and chat with us, and they've taken like a couple $1 million. And there's this tiny little centralized company up in Toronto or whatever, but they're using discrete log contracts, and they figured out, there's good enough oracles to be able to take bets on most things. and it works. And it's just, you know, it's decentralized settlement. It basically leverages, you know, DLCs, and that's not even the tip of the iceberg. That's like the tip of the iceberg. I just think this next cycle is going to see such a massive explosion in companies that want to actually make money leveraging aspects of Bitcoin, leveraging things that Bitcoin allows you to do that weren't possible before. I'm too dumb to think of them, but it seems really clear that there are going to be thousands of them in the next 5-10 years.
Max, how does this system meld with the legacy system? Do you think it's a break, like Tina's saying, we build alongside and parallel with it, and then there's sort of a break, or does it kind of meld together as adoption happens and we bring over, because there's demand now to do deals in Bitcoin, there's more development on Lightning, etc. Do you see them sort of melding, or kind of like a clean break, parallel, and then clean break?
Well, to pick up on what Corey was saying there, I think what I was thinking when he was talking is we're going to see a lot more wealth distribution in a way where there's always from within, there's always a flowering, you know, like a lotus flower. It's always generating from within more creativity. And so things become a lot more balanced. You know, you don't, nowhere in nature do you have the current capitalist system where it's dominated by one central authority, and that be the central bank. And the only thing in nature that is similar to that would be cancer, right? Cancer is something that's a predator that just eats things up. And that's what the central bank is doing. And it's totally unsustainable, where Bitcoin is totally organic, and it just fits in with our natures and and everything that we know as in a spiritual sense. And so that equanimity that should be part of the economy will be realized. And whether it's these small companies that bloom and become bigger and sustaining and create wealth, and then but right behind them will be another huge wave. And you know, one of the problems in the system now is you get a company like Microsoft that becomes a predator, and they just eat up all the competition, and they become huge, and they stifle innovation. And monopolies and oligopolies are very stifling in the US right now. In the turn of the last century, you had the trust busters, you had Teddy Roosevelt, and they had to break up all these monopolies. And because they got stifling, there's too much concentration, and that's not healthy. That's not natural. So this way, it's built into the system. It's built in because the money is perfect, then the competition will be perfect, and the outcomes will be perfect. So you end up with a situation where I think that distribution concept, as it's understood in economics, where people are always talking about wealth redistribution or distribution, it's a very clumsy term, and it's not very well articulated, or there's no policies that address it. But Bitcoin reinvents it and says, wait a minute, what we're going to do is we're just going to create perfect money, and people armed with perfect money are going to, the outcomes are going to be getting closer and closer toward perfection. It'll always hew toward perfection. That's the vector that Bitcoin's on. It's always heading toward that. And people come in, and you have an economy that's sustainable, right? If you have an economy that's sustainable and nobody's really thinking about it, I mean, look at all around us. You know, humans are the only animal on the planet that seems to have fucked it up, right? No other animal has these problems. It's totally sustainable. They're not taking tranquilizers all day and starving to death, right? How did humans fuck it up so badly? So I think Bitcoin will rectify that wrong.
I tweeted earlier that Bitcoin is hubris resistant. It, you know, rights the wrong of the conceit that humans can manage money, the central part of an economy, extremely complex organic system, better than the naturally occurring form of itself. Tina, how do you see this playing out in terms of like the melding of the systems together, and how do you see Bitcoin? Let's move past debating how long this is going to take, but what's a Bitcoin future look like to you?
Future in what time frame?
Just past Bicoinization, a Bitcoin future, a Bitcoin-based future.
Okay. Well, my guess is that you watch the systems grow in parallel. The governments will attempt to impose constraints, and Bitcoin will grow to a size where it won't be able to enforce those constraints. There's some size at which market participants will pretty much do what they want, and there'll be so many participants, the desire for Bitcoin will be so high, and the tools and techniques to work around those constraints will be such that people will simply do what they want to do. People already do what they want to do. Anybody who takes drugs? They do what they want to do. There are lots of things that people do, and they do it anyway, regardless of what they're permitted to do. And they find ways to do these things. So eventually Bitcoin will grow large enough, and the process will just evolve naturally. We'll just step into the next system. People will start operating in the system, at some point. Interesting thing about Bitcoin is, and I think what Max was driving at, but I'll state it a little bit differently. We see this with mining. Mining is maybe the most perfect competition that humans have ever seen. In economics, they teach you in basic economics class. That first class I took, I think it was macro, was 1B, and they teach you about perfect competition, monopolistic competition, oligopolistic competition, all the different types of competition that you could have. And I don't really remember, this is a long time ago that I took these classes. We don't see perfect competition existing anywhere. And the nature of Bitcoin mining is pretty close to perfect competition, even though you have some larger miners. Because there really isn't a way to earn a return on your Bitcoin, I don't believe we're going to have a world that has credit or debt in a Bitcoin-only world. I think that this will go away. I think debt and credit will be destroyed by Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin's inherent nature is deflationary. I like to give the example that if I had a business, and I'm going to paint an extreme example just for the point of illustration. If I had a business and I was doing $1 million in sales in the first year, I borrow $1 million and my margin is 10%. I make $100,000 in year 1. In year 10, it grows to a $10 million a year revenue business, still have a 10% margin. My debt was $1 million. I earn $1 million in income. I can pay off that debt pretty easily. In a deflationary world, in a Bitcoin world, in year 1, I have a business. I borrow 100 Bitcoin. I'm earning 100 Bitcoin in value. I have a 10% margin. I'm earning 10 Bitcoin. In year 10, I'm earning 10 Bitcoin because its value has gone up tremendously in buying power, not just against dollars, but in buying power. I can buy much, much more with my Bitcoin. I earn a 10% margin. That's 1 Bitcoin. I can't pay off that debt. It's 100 Bitcoin that I owe. I don't have it. I'm only earning 1 Bitcoin a year. I think that its deflationary nature is highly destructive to debt and lending. I think debt and lending and credit exist in a world that we're in because those were technological solutions that had to be met. I think you'll have a world which is only a world of equity and a world of money. I think the whole nature of a yield curve is a legacy view of the world. I don't think it will exist. I think that you might find trust minimized ways of lending. See, to my way of looking at things, flood is in some ways not really lending. You're kind of renting out your use of Bitcoin. So you're renting it to somebody for a fee. That kind of is what working capital ought to be. You're kind of renting it, but it's been done in a trust minimized way. The more ways we can figure out to lend in a trust minimized way, those will grow. And so you will have a natural, it will be a very different kind of lending than currently exists. The way if I were to broadly define the legacy fiat world against the Bitcoin world, I think their foundations are different. To me, fiat legacy is founded fundamentally on the concept of a promise. I promise to pay you. That is the entire nature of the foundation of the legacy system. Bitcoin is founded on the idea of trust minimization. That's a very, very different structure. And I think they lead to very different types of consequences. I heard George Gammon comment, I've heard Raoul Pal comment. They think that you have to have things operate in a certain way, and you can start this way, and it will inevitably lead to that. And I think that there are examples that they might like to use. I've heard George Gammon say this. He uses free banking. I think that we didn't have technological solutions that were available in free banking with gold, in the legacy system with currency, non-backed currency. We simply don't have the technology to deal with certain things. And I think that the constraints of Bitcoin, a trust minimized deflationary money, will set up its own restrictions that will prevent things from happening a certain way. George Gammon was commenting with Peter McCormick and saying that, well, if you had some form of catastrophe or war, then you could force lending. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's not actually going to happen. You could try, but I don't think that people will accept that money, that you won't be able to have more Bitcoin. I think the answer will be a different answer. I think you will see evolve maybe insurance companies to deal with some of these issues where you're prepaying for your risk. I think it'll look like different structures. I think we'll see different structures evolve. I'm very much a non-believer in the idea that the world has to continue to exist the way it has. I don't notice a lot of horse and buggy carriage repair shops when I drive around. I go to gas stations. The world changed. Sure. We don't. I don't need a watering station for my horse. I don't need a place with my horse. Go get some hay to refuel. The world's changed. It's a different world. Different technologies will bring about different things. And I think that, that's a silly kind of example, but I think you can, if you think about it, you'll figure out a lot of examples like that. The world.
Yeah, I think that brings up a lot of great stuff to comment on. I definitely want to hear Max's thoughts on all of this. Corey, you want to chime in first, and then I want to hear Max's comments also on the idea of how Bitcoin will change the way our economy works, the way our society works, and just the future in general. Take that as far as you want, focus it on just the economy part of it, go to the social level, wherever you want to go.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, so we've got a commenter in the YouTube chat today. So hi, Addison, thanks for joining. A lot of questions about, what happens in a Bitcoinized world, and will it create, some other problems, and which problems will it solve and which will it not solve? So we can absolutely talk about the problems that Bitcoin is likely to solve. And we can also, sort of play it out as best we can rationally and try to think about some of the other issues that it will create. One thing we cannot do is say that leaving a system that is significantly worse in all respects, the base money is just completely broken in a fiat system. This experiment has failed. Leaving that alone, just because the much better money, a money that's 10 times better, 100 times better, 1,000 times better, 1,000,000 times better, and not doing that because you're worried about some of the problems that better money might create, or opportunities that it might create. Because when you have a problem, you have an opportunity to go and create something to make that better. You don't do that. That's not how we advance as people. That's not how businesses make decisions. It's not how societies make decisions. It's immoral to leave the crappy thing in place just because you're worried that the better thing might have a few negative side effects. So that's kind of the, from first principles, you replace the crappy thing with the much, much better thing, no matter what. Then you think about, okay, what are some of the amazing benefits of Bitcoin? And, there's been a lot of back and forth, and some people attempting to do some educating and pointing toward great resources in the chat, like Stefan Livera's podcast and Safety's book, et cetera. I would say probably the most interesting thing, and both of these guys have talked about it plenty, is when you remove friction by having everyone essentially using the base money and being able to, in the not so distant future, exchange any good and service globally for Bitcoin, for slivers of a Bitcoin, for sats, and probably in the future subsats or whatever they end up getting called. You remove all that friction, it basically increases the opportunity for people to work with each other, to cooperate, to pay for goods and services without that tax of switching back and forth between currencies, without the friction of having to wait for the legacy financial system to be sending that value around the world. So I'll just be, I mean, we already do this. Some of us are kind of living in the future that everyone will live in the not too distant future, which is just being able to contract with anyone for any good or service anywhere in the world at any time. And the amount of economic activity that unleashes will lift all of us. And we will, in my view, if sort of the steady state productivity growth under sound money was probably like 2% globally, and then it stagnated a bit, and let's say it's gone down to 1.5 or something in the fiat experiment, I think under a money that's much better than gold and has all of the properties and capabilities of Bitcoin, is widely used by billions of people around the world as a store of value, a medium of exchange, unit of account, you're actually going to see global productivity at a steady state. Like average global productivity could be 5%, could be 10%. We don't know. It could be much, much, much bigger and better. It's going to unleash a pure form of capitalism and cooperation, the likes of which we've never before seen on this planet. It'll be like the Belle Epoque times 1,000. So that's what I'm really interested in. Yes, sure, there will be some people left behind, but I think we're going to have plenty of excess capacity, plenty of money, plenty of resources, plenty of new technologies to absolutely be able to take care of people if, in a charitable way.
Max, Bitcoin future. There's a lot there you can play with, man. There's a lot there. You can go in whatever direction you want. Addison wants to know what's the Bitcoin future.
Well, what stops people from doing what they want to do? And it all comes down to fear. Most people are riddled with fear. And fiat money compounds the problem because it creates a situation where, let's say in this country, if suddenly you're absent fiat money, you can become homeless. If you have to go to the hospital and you need some medical attention, the way it's set up now is that you could become bankrupt, and something like hundreds of thousands of Americans went medically bankrupt in the last couple of years, and that's fear, and that tool of fear is used to subjugate. It's used to propagandize. It's controlled centrally by the worst amongst us who have fiat-based power. Now, with Bitcoin in the mix, what happens when you take that fear away? And when you take the fear away, that vacuum inside of you is replaced by love. It's replaced by faith. And if you take the average person and you take away all their fear and you replace it with love or replace it with faith, that person is a different person. That person is doing something they're doing, and they're doing it fearlessly, with compassion, with and that makes all the difference. So, and that can happen pretty quickly. When enough people lose their fear in this country and in the world around us, because the fiat money fear barons have been put out of business by Bitcoin, that's it. We have a spiritual awakening where our fear is gone. And once fear is gone, you're at peace. And with peace, you can do something or not do something. But doesn't matter if you do it or not do it. And that's something that I think we will experience in our immediate futures. And that's something that we see very, very, very rarely. It's hinted at through certain religious tracks, religious concepts, the hints at this idea that doesn't nail it, doesn't solve for it. We see it through artistic endeavors, when we're moved by a work of art, for example, that's fear leaving our body. When we see a work of art that's fantastic and it moves us emotionally, that's the fears leaving us, and it's replaced with this faith, and we have a spiritual experience, we have an emotional experience. And but it's so we kind of know it's there, but it's like a ghost, the ghost of actualization, the ghost of ideation is here, but we can only glimpse it through a peripheral vision, through our maybe our sixth sense, right? It's hinted at through the artists and the poets. With Bitcoin, it becomes realized. It becomes who we are, and our journey, many long years, hundreds of thousands of year journey of fear and hate comes to an end. And we may be the generation that experiences it. So on one hand, the Gen Z and the millennials, they got the raw end of the stick because the boomers stole everything. But on the other hand, as the boomers die off, it could be the millennials and the Gen Z that experience this rapture. So that could be interesting to see. I hope I'm around to see the full flowering of this. Hello?
Your
Brady,
mic is
you're
off.
on mute, bud.
Sorry, guys.
All right.
People will think that you sound crazy who are new to Bitcoin talking like this, Max. So how is it exactly that a simple thing like money could have such a drastic change on individuals and then therefore society?
Right. Well, you have to go back to the history of money, and that's of course the part of the Bitcoin rabbit hole is people end up having that part of the experience. And it's Bitcoin is technology, it's money, and it's sociology, and it's psychology, and it's game theory, and all these different things. And we have a lot of people in the space that speak on these things, and more every day, who approach it from even a Michael Saylor is at heart an engineer. When he talks about Bitcoin, he's talking about it as a world-class engineer, electrical engineer talks about it. And he's already at the incredibly high level. And then you put Bitcoin into the mix, and what comes out of his mouth is stunning, right? It's, oh my God, it's like incredible. So going back to the history of money, it's the beginning of our experience here on this planet has always been characterized by a need to assemble, to communicate, to use some kind of communication, and to travel and to move and to take in the world through our senses. I mean, we have these brilliant senses, the eyes and ears and taste, and why do we have all these senses? To take in so much of the world, to take in so much sensory information in such a powerful way, and the mind that's still unknown territory, that it's going at a hash rate of about 1 billion hashes per second, the human mind, and it's just assimilating all this, and there's trillions of synapses, and it's just this organism that's taking in the minuscule and the cosmic at the same time and making sense of it, or not making sense of it. But we have these communities, and at the core of all these communities is communication. And at the core of this communication also is this wanderlust of the world around us, which means we're traveling, we're moving, and that always involves trade. That always involves trade. That always involves the ability to exchange something of value with somebody else. And what happened over time is that what humans noticed is that if I can exchange for something for value that holds its value, then it helps me take in my senses. It helps me move around, helps me travel in the world. It helps my wanderlust. It helps my sensory insatiable need of my senses to take everything in. If I have something of value that keeps its value. So we had many experimentations. We had beads, we had shells, we had, gold, of course, played this role for thousands of years. Gold takes value into the future. I can take my gold anywhere in the world. Somebody will accept it in exchange. Even though it's not recognized formally as a medium of exchange by any government, people will nevertheless take my gold. I can go anywhere in the world. It has exchange value, and that exchange value has been consistent for thousands of years. So then that brings us to Bitcoin. And it takes everything up a level, because now, instead of having relative scarcity, I've got absolute scarcity. It's different than gold in this respect. Gold is relatively scarce, but it's not absolutely scarce. Gold is relatively portable, but it's not absolutely portable. Gold is relatively divisible, but it's not divisible to 100 million places. And a few other things that Bitcoin has that are superior to gold. So then you take that human with that wanderlust that wants to, through their senses, take in all the cosmic reality, all the immediate reality, all the relationships, all the communication. We are a sponge for reality. We love reality. We want more of it. And you put into the mix where I can use this perfect form of absolutely scarce medium of exchange language, money thing. And suddenly, as Shakespeare wrote, the world is your oyster. You can go anywhere at any time. And you've got your Bitcoin world is there at the same time. Wherever you are, you're with Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is always with you. You can always exchange. You're always going to be welcome. It's unconfiscatable. Again, something that's not true with gold. Bitcoin is unconfiscatable. So I can go literally anywhere in the world, show up, and I can walk into a room of Bitcoiners and say, I need this, I need this, I need this. They're like, great. This, it's going to cost you X number of Bitcoin. Fine. Now I'm here. Now here I am, and I'm in this new place, and my senses are taking in new things. Our senses are insatiable. Our wanderlust is insatiable. Why? Humans are always going to be pushing the envelope. We're always going to be flying to the moon. We're always going to be crossing the ocean. The early ocean crossings were done by folks who thought the Earth was flat and they were going to sail right off the ocean. Did they stop? No. How many people signed up to fly to Mars? Plenty, even though it's a suicide mission. But their heart has an insatiable quest for the new. And it's both our greatest asset and our greatest weakness, because the money sucks. The money, unfortunately, does not equal our ambitions as humans to know everything and to experience everything. With Bitcoin, these two things are finally merged. Perfect money with a human soul. You put those together and you have a new evolutionary step. It's a quantum evolutionary step. We're going to be a different species very soon, because the legacy system and the inadequacies of this system that we've had now a 200,000 year experiment with will change. It'll be a quantum change. It'll be a step change. And of course, change is something most people don't want to experience. People are resistant to change, even with that wanderlust. People, if you look at the vast majority of people, they're mired in fear. They're mired in hatred because they are the victims of the fiat money paper pushers and the paper barons. And they live in hovels. They live in a prison of paper money. And they dream of escaping. And again, I say it, Bitcoin is a vector. It's a vector out. Michael Saylor's on that vector. He has a dream to be richer than Jeff Bezos. I believe he will be. That dream will be realized. You have lots of different people with lots of different dreams, like Robert Breedlove. When I listen to him talk, I mean, he's got a dream about, I think it's very spiritual in nature, what he talks about. I think he can do this fearlessly. There's no reason why whatever his vision is can't be realized. All dreams can be realized. And think about that. All dreams can be realized if the money doesn't support the fear mongers. If the fear goes out of business and love takes over, there's nothing that can't happen. And we as our natures are not horrid. We're not the horrid people that we pretend to be. We're actually greater than that. The problem has been the money. And with the money going back 200,000 years is a form of monetizing our sensual wanderlust. That's what money's been. And it hasn't really been up to the task until now. Now, this thing up here, there's a path to be opened yet that is quite expansive. It's like Carl Sagan. Remember that show Cosmos? You could feel with Carl Sagan, he had that wanderlust of the cosmic dimensions of things, and he communicated that very well through television, and he became very well known for this. because he touched on something, because people really do have a cosmic lust to know, to take it in, because their minds are extremely advanced, but nobody yet has used that organ to its fullest, in its fullest, in a networked way. We've had the occasional super genius, the Da Vinci's, Einstein, and they're like silos in out there, and they super accomplished in their spiritual accomplishment. But imagine applying that to the network, and you've got 1 billion or more people suddenly having that epiphany at the same time, which I think Bitcoin enables. And then you have a different reality, and fear dies off. Fear is like your appendix. It's an organ we don't really need. We don't need fear. It served a purpose 1 million years ago, but it doesn't serve any meaningful purpose. And the people who say it does are the paper money fiat printers, because that's how they maintain their empire of fear, through bullshit paper money. Now Bitcoin is here to eradicate that.
Who feels inspired to take the baton? Speak up.
Okay.
I want to ask Tina a question. Well, Tina, actually go ahead and say what you're going to say. Then I have a question for you.
A couple of things. I'll go backwards. A comment on what Max was talking about fear. Somebody had commented that fear is stronger than love, to which I have one counter. That if you're a parent defending your children, you give up your life, not because of fear, but because of love. Love is much stronger than fear. Love is much more powerful than fear. People follow people much stronger because they love them and admire them. That's the wrong face. Come on.
For real, Breck.
People follow others. I had a professor who said that Winston Churchill inspired a nation, moved a whole nation. People didn't fear him. They adulated him. They believed in him. They followed him. Dictators try to move you and inspire you with fear, but that doesn't work. Look, even Adolf Hitler, he attempted to use love to follow him, even though he also used fear as a tool. But love, people are much more strongly moved by feelings of love and admiration than they are pushed by feelings of fear. We're very much moved by those feelings. So I agree with Max. Credit is not a good thing. Credit is incredibly predatory. Credit is predatory at its very nature. People become debt slaves. They can't get off this horrible treadmill. You have lenders who are predatory lenders because they lend you money that they know you can't pay back. They lend it in ways that they know you can't pay back, which enables them to acquire your things. I think we will have some lending in a Bitcoin world for people who are predatory, and people will eventually learn that they don't want to borrow because borrowing in Bitcoin will cost them their Bitcoin and anything else that they have. And I don't think that will be the nature, but people talk reverently about credit. Credit is horrible. At its very core, credit is fundamentally evil. A mortgage is a death pledge. That's what a mortgage is. Go look it up. Bitcoin works because Bitcoin is pure competition. Unlike the legacy system, if you're very wealthy, you can have rentier returns on things. You can have returns from interest payments. But Bitcoin demands that you either work or invest. You have to work for your Bitcoin. The legacy system, the credit system, is fundamentally different in that regard. You can relatively easily live off of the credit. You have to. The only two ways that you'll be able to earn Bitcoin in a Bitcoin-only world is you will have to invest it, or you will have to work for it. Now, there'll be many different means of investing it, and you may hire someone to help you invest it, but it comes from work. There are no easy ways of gaining Bitcoin, and I think in many ways it will be a much better system. It also drives competition. I was saying before about perfect competition. Perfect competition is actually not great for producers, but wonderful for consumers. Consumers very much benefit from more and more competition. It means that producers have to work harder. Companies don't always want to work harder for you. They like to do as little as they can. Companies will regularly look for regulatory protection to protect you from their competitors because they don't want to work quite that hard. We've seen over and over again when there is more competition that comes into a space that you get more for less, or you get better service or better quality for the same amount because people have to deliver more than they would when they can get somebody to just beat you up with regulation. So I don't know if I'll be around for a Bitcoin world. I'm not young. I hope I am. I hope it happens fast. I hope I'm around for Bitcoin on the world, but I think it will be better in many, many ways. And I think people think the way they do about the legacy system because they can't imagine the world could be any different. Money is about pricing the things in the system that we have. It's pricing resources. Money prices everything. And prices are the most important thing in resource allocation. If you think of money as a yardstick, but you're constantly changing the length of that yardstick, how do you get accurate pricing? You can't have accurate pricing. That's the fundamental flaw with a flexible money. People think that you can work miracles with having more money. More money doesn't bring about more resources. It doesn't mean that there's more wood to build buildings. It doesn't mean that there's more cement to pour. It doesn't mean that you've produced more doctors or engineers. Money doesn't change the resources in your economy. If you make more of it, if you have X set of resources in your economy, changing the amount of money that you have doesn't make it 2x. This notion that we have about money is absurd. We think we create it and then there's more stuff available to buy. That's absurd. All you're doing is changing the price, which becomes a form of theft. So there's enormous problems with the existing system. And I don't know if Bitcoin will be perfect. There are a few things in the world are perfect and maybe nothing.
Yep.
And Bitcoin will have its own set of problems, but it will be so much better than the existing system. What was that question, Corey?
Well, I wanted to ask you.
Money is so foundational to humanity.
Yeah. I wanted to ask both of you guys, we're closing out 2020. We're heading into what we think is going to be, a really exciting year. It's getting really chippy out there in public discourse, and we're seeing a lot of people, essentially turn toward mercenary profiteering, and we're seeing a lot of, basically just like big arguments. And I want to ask both of you guys, with your life experience, and neither of you have any trouble whatsoever taking somebody on and having an argument, but also, maintaining personal relationships with those people. Like how should Bitcoiners maintain their equanimity and their humility in the face of being so damn right? And knowing that all these other people that you're arguing with and the people that are wrong are eventually going to be, part of a Bitcoinized world, because that's reality and they're still going to be around. So how do you think about, well, let's put Max on the spot here. So, JP Morgan is putting out all kinds of bullish reports, and eventually, he's no dummy. And if Jamie Dimon doesn't die, he's going to end up being a Bitcoiner, and, he's probably going to have a bunch, and they're going to have a bunch of Bitcoin businesses, and, they're going to do what they're going to do or whatever. Like, how would that feel if someone that's been, you know, so diametrically opposed to what you've been working for and working on and been so disingenuous along the way, turns around and in the future is a Bitcoiner? How will you handle, you know, him begging to come on your show to explain, you know, he had it wrong and, you know, wants to kiss your giant Max ring? And are you going to let him on and have some kumbaya in 2028?
Well, my feelings toward Jamie Dimon has always been a form of tough love. You know, I've often been chiding him because I know at his core he has enough sense to understand what I'm saying, and so it's just a question of nudging him, and we worked. So Jamie Dimon was teachable. He hit his fiat money bottom, and now he's coming over to Bitcoin. Somebody like Peter Schiff, I think, will go to the grave as a bitter no coiner. Same thing as Nouriel Rubini. They will never have hit their fiat money bottom. So until you hit your fiat money bottom, you're not open to the message of Bitcoin. So you will go to the grave as a bitter no coiner. And so I put it out there. You know, these are guys who I know are hurting inside from all the pain that they've caused over the years. And the way to get themselves to a better place is to come over to Bitcoin. And a lot of them now are. Ray Dalio was gone from a skeptic. Now he's on the fence. He'll be jumping into Bitcoin. Even Michael Saylor was a skeptic back in 2013. Now he's on the side of Bitcoin. Safedino Moose, when we first told him about Bitcoin in 2012, I think it was, he totally rejected it, said it was bullshit. But over time, few interviews later, he came over to the side of Bitcoin. And when I was at Peter Schiff's house in Connecticut a few years ago during Christmas, Spencer Schiff was there. And it was the first time he had ever heard of Bitcoin. Now Spencer Schiff is on the side of Bitcoin. So I think you know, one must exhibit a certain degree of mercy for the bitter no coiner and not to write them off entirely. I think anybody has the ability to get it and to safely transition over to Bitcoin. So if it's, you know, I speak in the language that Jamie Dimon speaks in. I know the Wall Street language. I know that he wakes up every morning basically vomiting bile and hatred of himself because he knows the kind of pain and destruction he's been responsible for. But we can't simply, I mean, you know, I remember Jesus and the lepers. You know, he didn't throw the lepers away. And Jamie Dimon is a leper in his own right, and I don't feel right just throwing him into the garbage. He can be saved, and he's now getting it. J.P. Morgan is now embracing it, and so let's not just leave these people to the gutter. Let's try to reach out with some compassion and help them, help themselves. I think that's the Satoshi way.
Tina, what kind of love can you conjure up for the people that you've battled and been frustrated by over the years in the future?
I'm not frustrated by them. I know that they will own Bitcoin. I tell them all, you will buy it. I give them a price they'll buy it at. Here's the thing that I understand. I'm not special. I came to an understanding, and I know that other people will also come to that understanding. Everyone will understand Bitcoin, and everyone will own it. It's just that simple. They will also figure it out. I have no doubt they'll figure it out. People figure it out whenever they figure it out, and that's fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. I didn't buy Bitcoin till this cycle. Max bought Bitcoin very early on. I heard Trace Mayer talk in 2014 and foolishly didn't start buying. I talked to him afterwards. I should have said, how do you buy this stuff, Trace? But I stupidly didn't. We talked about other things. But I could have had a lot more. People will come to understand. People are mostly pretty smart. People understand things. So we'll keep talking, and little by little, they will come on board. They will start to see it and understand it. I think that it's reasonable to have a skepticism. We've seen lots of things. I've traded for many years. I've invested, and we've seen many things that we're skeptical about. It happens all the time in markets that people are skeptical. I was an early Amazon user. I started buying the books on Amazon, I think in 1999. I never bought the stock. I love using Amazon. I could have bought a lot of stock at $5 and $6 in like 2002 or 3. I could have owned a real crap ton of Amazon stock. I became a Prime member not that many years later. One of the first Prime members. Stock was like $40 at the time. I could have bought less, but I could have bought Amazon. I don't know where to say $3,000. Happens all the time. People have views on things. They change their mind. They see things differently. People see Amazon differently today than they saw it then. I don't know why I didn't buy it. I was dumb. This is just how the world works. And they'll figure it out.
I think people are going to be figuring it out really fast. Just to bring it back to full circle to where we started this conversation, I think we are going to see people having to figure it out very fast, and the situation is going to be forced. The issue is going to be forced much more quickly than we thought it was going to be over the next couple of years. It should be a bonkers 2021. This 2020 year was incredible. PTJ, Stan Druckenmiller, Michael Saylor, Stone Ridge Asset Management, BlackRock's talking about it. Grayscale's going crazy. PayPal's in. Square bought 50 million. Ricardo Salinas has 10% of his liquid net worth in Bitcoin. The all-time high was hit and called on the New York Times on November 30th. I know we're all waiting to celebrate 20K. Precisely. Mass Mutual, 169-year-old, insurance company, which is, insurance companies are usually pretty conservative in these regards, bought $100 million of the Bitcoin via NYDIG. This is just trying to get in under, the end of the year. And I have a feeling we're going to see so much more of this in Q1, Q2, Q3.
This morning too. Got to throw in our homies in the UK, Ruffer Asset Management, which I'd never heard of, but evidently 27 billion under management. One of their funds has 625 mil. There's a lot of like illiquid strategies, which is funny because they just put 2.5% of it in the most liquid of all assets. But yeah, exciting. So little 15 million allocation for a UK institution, but I'm sure the first of many, many, many more.
Exactly. And all of these will add up and they're just going to keep falling. So how does it play out? Like Max was talking about, the game theory says that this is a reserve asset. People are buying it and holding it. They're not just speculating on it to make dollars. They're using it as a way to prevent themselves from losing purchasing power in dollars. So they're holding it for a long time. That narrative is, sweeping the industry now, the entire economy at this point, and it's just going to continue. So that means, liquidity comes off exchanges, supply dries up, there's supply shock. We're going to see massive green candles, as Tina was saying earlier, as we reprice this asset to moving, as the narrative or the mindset about it has shifted from, I'm going to make some fiat gains on this speculation, digital money, magic internet money, to I'm holding this for the long term. And so now, that's where the price is. It's way up there now because everyone's changed their perception about what this thing actually is. And I think we're going to see an incredible 2021 and beyond that will blow people's minds because we've brought it forward several years. I have no doubt. So Max, final words from you on what you expect to see in the next year or so, what nostalgia from this year, from just your Bitcoin past in general. Get us riled up, man. Tell me what we're going to see in 2021.
I think the big story in 2021, aside from Bitcoin, is going to be dollar collapse, U.S. dollar collapse. As I've said before. We talked about it. We had some different views on this. I'm kind of sticking with my view that dollar hits, it collapses, U.S. dollar. And that's the other side of the trade. That's what Michael Saylor is saying. That's what Paul Tudor Jones is saying. That's what other people like Stan Druckenmiller has gone long gold. Anyone who buys gold is going short the dollar. And they're also buying Bitcoin. But Bitcoin, one of the big shocks of this year was when BlackRock reported that they saw in their ETF business, and they're the biggest ETF provider in the world, the biggest money manager in the world. They saw people dumping gold ETFs to buy Bitcoin. And that was remarkable to see that happen this year. It's just incredible. It makes that Barry Silbert ad for Grayscale drop gold that he did earlier in the year, which people thought was outrageous. Nobody would dump their gold to buy Bitcoin. What idiot would do that? And then here we are at the end of the year, and the numbers tell us that's exactly what's going on. That's amazing. But I think 2021, I think that's the US dollar is it's no longer gonna be a world reserve currency. And I think we have to get ready for a massive economic collapse and just hope it doesn't last too long. But so that's what I see in 2021.
Corey, you want to give us your 2021 prospects for Bitcoin, just the economy in general, Bitcoin industry? Take your pick on exactly what you want to look at, but let's hear some thoughts about 2021.
Well, I mean, it's going to be really exciting. And, I think the majority of people that are in Bitcoin and interested in Bitcoin, just because of the exponential nature of growth of the community, most people, this is their first bull market, right? I mean, even I came in spring of 17, so I caught sort of the tail end of the last one. So it's been awesome to go through the entire cycle and do the whole, try to listen to people and maintain your faith and stack through the dark winter and pick up some cheap sats in the 3s and the 4s and the 5s and the 6s as much as you could. And then, see sort of the fruits of your labor and the fruits of your education, the fruits of your commitment start to pay off basically as the market starts to run again. And, I don't think that this asset is fairly priced. I think that we have tons of upside. I have absolutely no idea what happens in the future. I don't think that 4-year cycles continue forever. I don't know if it breaks down in this one or the next one or the one after that or whatever. We will see. I see a lot of logic in, it's interesting. Some of the big funds out in New York are starting to talk about essentially a super cycle or a shallower pullback, basically because Tina started talking about it and then Preston started talking about it on his show. And I think they're kind of like, it's worked its way into people that are not anywhere close to Bitcoin Twitter or Bitcoin maximalist type podcasts. So pretty cool that that's getting out there. I still am kind of the belief that there'll probably be like a huge blow off top at some point in this. And so it'll go up more than it probably should have. And so, while you may see like a 30 or 40% pullback from a weekly high or a weekly close or a monthly close, whatever the intraday high is, when it gets completely insane in the froth, you may still see a big pullback of, 60, 70, 80% or something like that. But, this is all just thumb in the air, just thinking about things. I'm committed to holding my own stack for generations and teaching my kids about it. I gave some sats to my daughter for losing a tooth last week. So I'm converted. I actually have no idea what my fiat net worth is. I only care about my Bitcoin stack. And, so it's kind of, it's interesting and challenging and fun to be living in the future. The future is all around us for those people that are talking to Bitcoiners and thinking about Bitcoin every day. But, this is definitely not where mainstream society is. And, all chances are that we're going to see a massive asset rally in 2021 as vaccines roll out and, people start to really go back to work and go out and have fun again. There's a lot of pent up demand for traditional assets. And, that's going to be probably good for Bitcoin price too, because people will have all this excess cash and will be, investing a lot of that in Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is probably going to be the fastest horse in a secular bull market as well. So, that's just kind of my view of what's probably going to happen in 2021. We're going to have a lot of friends that don't pay attention to Bitcoin and, you know, are still doing just fine and buying bigger houses or whatever. But we know what we're in this for, and it ain't just fiat gains, that's for sure. So keep educating yourself. You know, tell your friends. You know, I still go back to the classic line, like, what you're willing, the amount of money, the amount of wealth that you're willing to store in the Bitcoin protocol is directly correlated to your level of understanding. So the best thing you can do for anyone in your life that you care about is just encourage them and help them get educated about Bitcoin, and they'll make their own decision. This shit really does sell itself, but it sells itself to people that actually understand it. If you understand it, you know, you'll be in a really, really good spot. So stay curious, stay bit curious. And you know what? You can use swanbitcoin.com to buy Bitcoin. So, you know, there, done, chilled.
Tina, let's hear your words of wisdom, wrap up, summarize some of your thoughts that you shared today, and put a bow on it for the end of this amazing banner year for Bitcoin in 2020.
Absolutely. It's interesting. I really wonder, what Corey just said was actually really interesting to me, as to whether or not any of my ideas have managed to percolate into places like that, like when people are talking about Bitcoin who really are not part of Bitcoin Twitter and all. That's kind of interesting. And if that's really true, I find that exciting. There's a guy who wants to know who I am, what I look like in the chat. But here's what's important. It doesn't matter who I am, and it doesn't matter what I look like, because it's not about me, it's about Bitcoin. If my ideas are good, then my ideas are good. If my ideas are crap, then my ideas are crap. You need to decide for yourself what you want to do. You need to learn as much as you can and try to figure out, do you want to own this? How much of it do you want to own? What do you understand about it? These are the things that actually really matter. It doesn't matter what I think. It's not relevant what I think about Bitcoin. These are my opinions. And the question is, have I made arguments which make sense? Do they hold water? Are they cogent? Do you agree with them? Arguments need to stand on their own. And it doesn't matter who says what. And just because somebody achieved some level of success or notoriety doesn't mean their ideas are better. Doesn't mean their thinking is clearer. And I think we make a mistake when we assume that because some authority figure says something, that it makes it smarter or better. We all fall for this. But nobody has the answers, but we try to learn from the things that they say and the things that they do. Aristotle was Aristotle because of the things he thought. So maybe it was a mistake to call myself Bitcoin Tina. And maybe someday in the future when I'm dead, people will talk about what Bitcoin Tina said about this or that. It doesn't matter, but it doesn't matter who I am. What matters is Bitcoin. That's what's really important. So I don't know exactly what 2021 will bring. I think that we will all be surprised. I don't actually expect a dollar meltdown. Max could be right, though. It's really hard to know. The interesting thing, everybody read his entire blog. And I liked it comes from The Sun Also Rises, written by Ernest Hemingway. And the character was asked, how did you go bankrupt? Slowly at first, then all at once. Markets actually work this way all the time. We see it happen in markets all the time. I've been trading and investing since the 80s. Max can confirm this from his own experience, not that I've been trading since the 80s. Markets tend to work on a gradually then suddenly basis. people do whatever they do in their trading, and then all of a sudden something catches fire and markets move. Look at the way Tesla moved. It was in a large sideways range for some period of time, and then went up like 10x in the last year. Gradually, then suddenly. I mean, it did well, then it went sideways. This happens in markets like every freaking day. And it's going to happen in Bitcoin too. This is not a bizarre idea. This is how the world works. So I don't know when that moment is, when that trigger event is. If I did, I'd lever up and get as much as I could. I'm not.
That's what's happening. That's what's happening right now. We see people lever up and get it.
I do think that things are happening very quickly, and they're going to accelerate.
And you can lever up on cheap fiat against it. So it's going to be absolutely fascinating. This is a fantastic discussion, guys. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and wrapping things up. I just want to say thank you to everyone for listening and watching. This has been an amazing year for Bitcoin, but also for Swan. We have built something from the ground up in this past year. We launched in March, and we have a product that people seem to like, and we're having a lot of fun building and sharing with everyone. We have shows like Swan Signal Live and Swan Lounge, and we're supporting and producing other great Bitcoin education content. It really is an incredible sort of just blessing. I think we all feel that way at Swan, to be able to do this work, get up and work for Bitcoin every day. And you all who are watching right now are a huge part of that. Thank you for being on the Swan Squad, whether or not you're actually stacking at Swan or you're just here in the chat, hanging out, spreading Bitcoin knowledge in general. We have an incredible opportunity here. We're at an inflection point in human history. We have a technology that can really bring a beautiful future, a bright orange future for all of us. It's not just about an investment. We believe it's the greatest investment case to make, and you should just buy some a little bit and stack sats slowly and find your way in, but then continue to learn, continue to pursue the question, what is money? And understand that this fiat sort of monster, this Frankenstein's monster that we've been living with, is really affecting our society at a fundamental level. And ourselves, individuals, at a fundamental level, as Max is getting to there. It's part of our soul even is reflected through money. It's the way we communicate to each other, our desires, our needs, the solutions that we have for each other in society. And that's what Max is talking about. We have something that kind of fits that language more like a glove, that language that of our souls, of our desires, of our wants and needs to each other much more precisely than fiat money has ever, because it's manipulated, or even gold. That's anything that's been centrally controlled. So this is a new thing in the world. It's a new thing in human history. It is an inflection point. It's a fascinating journey to be on, and it's blowing all of our minds collectively as we dive into Bitcoin. If you're new here, if you just started stacking with Swan, you're just learning about Bitcoin, and you're like, oh, this is just kind of crazy. It is kind of crazy. We feel you. We're there. It's something that feels like you have some knowledge that the rest of humanity doesn't quite have yet, and you're sort of ahead of the curve, and that's true. It's an amazing opportunity to front run the billionaires and make some money and be part of this new Bitcoin economy. But it's also, I think, imperative on us, and that's why we're doing shows like this, to share the message, the deeper message about what Bitcoin is and can mean for all of us. And I think that will help bring about that bright Bitcoin future in the best, safest, most peaceful way possible. Thank you again for joining us on this journey. Looking forward to an amazing 2021. Go to swanbitcoin.com, become a member, join the Swan Squad. Let's, we'd love to be your wingman on this Bitcoin journey that we're all enjoying together. Again, thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great year. Happy holidays. Shout out to Camilla for that. I saw in the chat. I love it. Happy holidays, everyone. Take care. We'll see you next year.